like to welcome up Reverend Naomi Nixon, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Student Christian Movement.
I'm not sure I'm in a low adrenaline state. But you know, it's going to be fine, and then I'll get there afterwards. I was ordained in 2001. My boss wasn't born then. Most of the people that I work for at the Student Christian Movement weren't born then. Why would they know anything about what we're talking about today? If I can have my first slide. I'm here to talk today about Honest Church, which in its original form was a campaign of the Student Christian Movement about honesty around LGBTQ+ welcome. There is no question, no equivocation, SCM wants every church to be inclusive, but we're not there yet. And while we're not there yet, please, can we just tell the truth about what our church is like? Because it is destroying my young people. I see them wounded by going to churches that lie to them. And they don't lie because they're setting out to be Machiavellian and mean. They lie because they're too polite. They lie because they want bums on seats. They lie because it's awkward to tell the truth. What happens is a young person, age of 18, sets off. They've maybe gone to one of your churches, one of your lovely churches, where no doubt they've seen gender and sexuality and expressions supported to a greater or lesser extent, but nevertheless they've been allowed to flourish as themselves. And they grow up and they go away to university and they think, oh, well, I'll go to a church. And who are the churches who turn up with pizza and nice coffee, and there are lots of other young people there and there are music they like? And they start going to that church, and after several months, they offer something like, for example, to join the music group. Suddenly, the fact that the young person I'm talking about happens to be gay means that the vicar takes them out for a cup of coffee, or the associate vicar takes them out for a cup of coffee. It's always a cup of coffee. I mean, really, like, if you ever ask a young person to go out for a cup of coffee, just be really clear that you don't mean it's one of these conversations, because we talk about coded language. To my students, it's like, oh, it's a cup of coffee. That basically means a really polite telling off and a really polite explanation for why you're going to be excluded. Well, of course you can't join the music group. Or it's that kind of church that you go to where just nobody ever really says anything about sexuality or gender expression or gender identity. Or it's that actually it's a bit more of a friendly church to LGBTQ+ people, but they're worried that they're actually not inclusive enough. They don't have a rainbow flag. They haven't had the conversation at PCC about joining inclusive church. And as a result, they kind of think they're not good enough to say that they're inclusive, so they say nothing at all. Well, imagine you're that 18-year-old, you're turning up at university. How many churches are you meant to try before you find out what's the real truth? So what we were saying with Honest Church is, look, there's a spectrum. This is not a binary thing. Inclusion is not just we're inclusive or we're exclusive. We're all, to some extent, on a journey. Could you please just tell us where you are in this spectrum? And the Honest Church website offers some tools about to help churches think about that. Now, essentially, no, I'm going to say that later on. But sorry, I just did that thing. Do you ever do this where, like, you just start talking and then you remember, oh, I've got a slide about that later on? So after we've been doing this for a while, Martine reached out because Watch felt that what the Student Christian Movement were doing with Honest Church really chimed in with what they wanted to be saying about women's roles in church. Well, I wonder what you think my trustees made of that initially. You can imagine having gone through discernment in the 1990s, I was very much all for this. I was member of Watch back when there were local diocesan groups that met in, sort of 30 or 40 people meeting at a time. So I was all for it. My trustees were like, really? Oh, okay. Why? And I want to tell you a story about why I think that is. In the parish that we were in before the one we're in now, my partner Charlotte and I were there, and she was the vicar, and because I do another job midweek, I'm associate minister. So it was our church, and the kids growing up there saw us up the front. There was also a curate who was also a woman, as it happened. We were the first women priests that had ever been there, but actually in a young life, that's quite a lot of women priests. And so we were coming to do preparation for having children receive communion. And as part of that, we did a sort of play communion in Sunday Club. And I made little outfits for them to wear, because it was very much a robing kind of church. So a little alb and a little chasuble and a little stole. And I asked them, put up your hand if you want to be the vicar. And they all put their hands up. And I picked Simon because he was the naughtiest. And I thought, if I've corralled him, it's going to help me get through the rest of it. So he starts putting on the alb and starts putting on the chasuble. And all of a sudden, Maisie, who is 6, pipes up and says, oh, he looks really funny because of girls. I love telling that story, but we did not prepare her. She's now of an age to be going to university. What did we do at St Mary Magdalene's Lillington to help prepare Maisie for the possibility that she might walk into a church where women aren't allowed to be priests? Where it's not just a coincidence, not just, oh, it's actually, Maisie, boys are allowed to be vicars, which, we did explain. But we didn't prepare her because we were polite. And I've just said that people in discriminatory churches are too polite to tell the truth, but we have to look at ourselves as well. If I could have the next slide, that would be great. So the trustees, once they'd heard about the discrimination that women in the Church of England face, then they were up for it. It's just that we had to do some infilling work to explain. And what we developed together with Watch was a toolkit. And this is the bit I nearly accidentally said earlier on. The reality is that the conservative churches are not going to put the Honest Church logo on their website and say, we discriminate against women. We are not welcoming you if you're gay or transgender or non-binary. We're going to... So with those churches, the reality is we need to equip people with the right questions to ask. So Sharon did a really great job earlier on of talking about the coded language, which a lot of us are familiar with. We've been trained in it. And I remember, I don't know if any of you remember, I think it was a Monica Furlong quote from a long time ago, saying how she remembers as a little girl feeling terribly proud of herself that she'd understood that mankind meant her as well. And I think we've all done that around the coded language, around what different churches mean in terms of their exclusionary practices. But if you're young and you've only ever been to one church and it was nice, you have no way of knowing that. You just don't have the access to that language. So we need to provide them with the questions to ask that kind of pierce through that. But then there are churches where actually we could start to create more of a culture of being honest about this. And we could deal with the problems like the Maisie problem by actually not being too polite, not worrying that she'll hate the church and leave it, which, let's face it, it's one of the reasons we don't tell our young people about the discrimination in the church. We can deal with that by being honest in our communications, and in particular on our websites, because if you're looking for a church, the website's the place you're going to go. And yeah, of course, once you're part of a church, you have very little reason to look at it. So it's something that can drift, and we can not really notice what it looks like for an outsider. Forgive me if that's incredibly obvious to you. So there are questions for church leaders to contemplate and to think about the answers that they would like to put on their websites, and to make sure that they're actually enacting in their ministry, so that there is a clarity that this is a place where women's leadership is welcome. This is a place where women are not expected just to conform to the tea-making, flower arranging kind of models of women's service in the church. There's one more thing I just wanted to say about the young people who are my trustees. Their very first question, when they were sort of interrogating the idea of going into formal partnership with Watch, the first thing they wanted to know is, where are they on trans? Because for my young people, the whole argument is about LGBTQ plus inclusion, because they think this is done. Why would they think it wasn't done? They've grown up with schools which are, no, they're not perfect, but they're so far ahead of where the world, let alone the church, are. They've seen women in leadership all their lives. So they've actually been socialized in a place where they're not as alert yet to the systemic injustices that are out there. The patriarchy is doing too good a job. So they think, well, that's all very well, but we hear too many feminists at the moment being trans exclusionary, so we're a Watch. There was no question, and I really want to say, Watch is not an organisation that's just for cis women. The answer I got, very straightforwardly, was all women, unquestionably, all women. Now, maybe we need to do a better job at Watch of making sure that that's clear, but I do really want to make sure that you, sitting here since it came up, that you know about that. So, if you could move on to the next slide. Oh, that's not what it looks like on my piece of paper in front of me. Something's happened in the formatting. Okay, I'll tell you what it says. So the other thing in the toolkit are questions for church leaders to ask themselves. I'm imagining that a lot of you here today are church leaders, and so I've picked out a few of these. Now, my guess is the first thing you're going to think when you see them or hear them is, oh yeah, no, we're fine at that. And I just want to invite you to just kind of think a level deeper. What else could we do about that? So the first question is, do your congregation know what opportunities or limits there are for women in your church? So I think that we've been guilty, as female clergy, I mean, we, me and Charlotte, not all of us, I don't know about the rest of you, of kind of thinking, well, if we're in leadership, we are the communication. And that's level one, sure, that's fine. I'm not sure we've always been clear in our communication about the actions that we're taking to ensure that there aren't subliminal expectations about all the other women. I'm not saying we haven't done it, but I look back and I think there are times we could have been clearer. Can I have the next slide? Oh, look, it's the same. Marvelous. Okay. So this one is, if your church embraces full opportunities for women, would a newcomer be easily able to tell that from your external communications? So, for example, if the vicar is a man, which, you know, male vicars are allowed, and let's say his wife is very involved in ministry there, wonderful. How do people know that it's not a headship situation? Because it might be really obvious if you go to that church that that's the case. But if you haven't said something really clear in the website, then actually it might look like other churches that people experience. And the next one, I have very little hope. Oh, it's even worse. not even a line. Okay. Do you regularly preach and communicate clearly about what your church believes about women's roles? Well, our church, as I say, is led by 2 women, and I think we really fail here. I think that I think that we do communicate it, but I don't think that we specifically preach about it. We had a sermon series last year about difference and inclusion, and members of the congregation led by giving testimony about their experiences of multiple different kinds of exclusion in the church. And we offered gender as one of the areas in which people might want to give testimony, and nobody did. And we thought about doing it ourselves and kind of worried that it was a bit too pushy. It was a little bit too much, because we were trying to empower the laity, and it was all terribly good reasons. But we had a whole series of talks about difference, and we didn't talk about it. So one of the things that we'll be talking about on the train home tonight is, well, actually, how do we consciously preach about this and not just include it? Because the truth is, again, that in our church, which is a very young church, it's hugely LGBTQ plus inclusion that we find ourselves talking about and thinking about, and probably also neurodiversity. Those are our kind of the kind of live issues in our church about how to include people. But we shouldn't take it as read. And so I issue the challenge to myself, and I offer it to you. So the last slide. Look, because I didn't do a speech bubble, we're fine. So, honesty and disagreeing well. Now, I haven't actually, I may be really out of touch here, but I'm not sure that disagreeing well is actually an official policy anywhere, but does it feel like a phrase that's with you? Yes, okay, right, we're all together in this. And I put it carefully in inverted commas. Clearly, honesty is a really vital part of actually disagreeing well. However, I want to come back to that thing about politeness. When I was at Sixth Form College, we studied Antony and Cleopatra, the Shakespeare play, and I remember learning about a particular quote, something that Caesar says. He says, the time of universal peace is near. And I remember our teacher explaining what he means by that is actually chilling. What he means by that is no one will disagree. What he means by that is everyone will be under my rule. I think of that often when we talk about disagreeing well, because it feels like something which is being said to oppress. It might not feel like that for you, and if it doesn't, I'm delighted, but it feels like that to me. It feels like I'm being asked to just put up with it and shut up. And actually, we've heard lots of examples of this today. But I really want to name it as an insidious kind of politeness, which I think liberals are particularly at risk of falling prey to, because we like the idea of being polite. We want to be inclusive. We want to be in conversation with people. But if disagreeing well means not telling our truth and not saying the difficult stuff on our website because it will upset Fred, or it means having an awkward conversation at PCC and it's just not really very nice, then actually that's oppression. That's Caesar's kind of universal peace and not Jesus's. Asking for honesty is a small thing. And one of the things that we've really found through this campaign is that actually nobody disagrees with it. As you can imagine, SEM, we, like Watch, get a lot of people who don't very much like us online. We also get things in the post, which is lovely. But we haven't had any of that about Honest Church. And actually, we have had some really moving experiences of conservative churches getting in touch and saying, actually, this is fair enough. Actually, we ought to be able to be honest. And for me, that is real reaching out across divides. When I am humbled by somebody I'm angry with, that actually their graciousness of actually saying, do you know what, you have a point, we're going to do something about this. And there are some churches that have made some real moves towards honesty because of that. So it seems like a really, really small thing, but it can really change things. And one of the things that we can do, because there's so many people here, okay, I was going to say everybody. If 80% of the people here, because there are some people who just I won't want to or won't remember, but if most of the people here downloaded the Honest Church logo, which I should say, it is available on the website. Everything from Honest Church is available free of charge. It's just there to download. It's just a resource. It's a campaign. It's not an organization. You don't sign up. It's very light touch. It's just there to be useful. And people have used it in lots of different ways. But if you put the logo on your website and say, ask us about our LGBTQ plus welcome, ask us about women's roles in our church, even if you're not in a church that's ready to kind of actually use some of the other language on the website or your own to self-identify, to use a phrase we've learnt from LGBTQ plus siblings, even if you're not there yet, you can say, ask us about it. We're a church where we're committed to being honest. And the more that starts to become normal, we can shift the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. Any questions for Naomi? Have we got one coming up there? Oh, thanks. Lovely, thank you. This is one from some of our onliners saying, what would you say about why complementarian churches are evasive and do not fully acknowledge their position on women? Why have they not kept to the Bishop of Maidstone, the Maidstone commitments to be transparent?
Well, I'm going to speak frankly. I think it's because those churches really depend upon young people's attendance. And young people are massively, predominantly inclusive. So if they say something, they make a big deal of it, people won't come.
Yeah, totally. It's quite interesting, actually, because as I understand it, although the Bishop of Maidstone did ask the churches to be transparent, now the Conservative Evangelical Bishop, Bishop of Ebbsfleet, has said it's a secondary matter and not important. It's not actually calling for it anymore. So I feel we've gone backwards there.
Yes, our policy is not to be honest anymore. Marvellous.
It's not important, yeah? Yeah, okay, fine.
I suppose at least it's honest.
All right, so second question is, what is meant by the phrase neurodiversity? What makes it an issue?
I will speak for the community that I know. I'm not a neurodiverse person myself, so forgive me if I get definitions wrong. In our church, we use it as a term to summarize people who have autistic spectrum disorders and ADHD, Asperger's, autism, and so in terms of how that actually manifests itself, so people who have difficulty with social interaction in the same way as neurotypical people do. So it's not that they can't do social interaction, it's just that they do it differently. And so in order to be in a neurotypical space, there are accommodations we need to make in kind of both directions. It's a constant learning process, so if anything I've said there was wrong, please forgive me.
Thank you. Any other questions for Naomi? Well, thank you very much, Naomi. That was really, really